I'll give some brief introductions, and then we'll turn it over to our speakers. So we have Dr. Marc Zimmerman and Dr. Abunya Agi. Abby, is it Agi or Agi? I should have checked that. Aggie. I should have checked that beforehand. My apologies. Okay. Aggie. So in terms of introduction, so Marc Zimmerman is one of our CHEAR faculty executive representatives, which serves as an advisory board to the CHEAR Center. He's the Marshall H. Becker Collegiate Professor in the Department of Health Behavior and Health Education at School of Public Health, as well as the Combined Program in Education and Psychology in LS&A. There are far too many other affiliations to list this morning, but I'll touch on just a few. That Marc is the principal investigator for the Flint Adolescent Study. He also directs the Prevention Research Center of Michigan, as well as the CDC-funded Michigan Youth Violence Prevention Center. And notable that Marc also received 2 years ago the President's Award here at the University of Michigan for Public Impact. So delighted to have you here today, Marc. We are also delighted to be joined by Dr. Abunya Agi, or Aggie, who's a postdoctoral research fellow in health behavior and health education, also at School of Public Health. Dr. Agi received her PhD from the Combined Program in Education and Psychology at the University of Michigan, and her research interests include the meaning that Black youth and emerging adults make about ethnicity and/or race and its implications for positive development, with particular attention to those with immigrant parents. So we're really delighted to have both of you here today. Thanks so much for joining. I'll turn it over to you. This is usually a very lively group, and it sounds like this is an interactive presentation. Usually I ask if you prefer to have questions during the presentation, but it sounds like that will be okay. And so everybody, please feel free to jump in along the way. And Abby and Marc, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Abby, you can start. You can set it up. Basically, Abby's going to present some of the ideas. We're going to talk about Yes Erase, and I'm going to give a little history about Yes, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the theory behind it, and Abby's going to talk about what we've been developing and what Yes Erase really is. But it's really starts at sort of this idea of anti-racism. So Abby's going to sort of start with that, and then we'll just go there. And I think I would say that in terms of interrupting us, or if you have a question, I can't see everybody because now that we're sharing screens, Abby and I will try to see that if we can. But the bottom line is, if you have something to say, just say excuse me and interject.
Yeah. And also feel free to put questions in the chat, and I can keep an eye on that as well while you're presenting.
Okay. Go ahead, Abby.
Yeah, so feel free to put questions in the chat, and Marc, feel free to sort of jump in if you feel like you need to add something. So good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm really excited to share our work on Yes Erase. So Yes Erase it stands for Youth Empowerment Solutions for Engaging Youth for Anti-Racism and Cultural Equity. As Marc said, we'll be going over some of the background of Yes Erase and why this project is important. We're going over the overview of Yes, the Erase adaptation. We're going to have a brief activity, and then we'll close out with the current status and next steps for the project. So before we get started, I want to start with something really light and non-controversial. What is racism? So the word racism conjures up a lot of emotions for a lot of people. People have differing ideas about what it is and what it looks like. And so I want to start by having us put our definitions on the table. What comes to mind when you think about racism? So if you scan this QR code with your phone camera, you can participate in the word cloud that we're going to be generating. And you can also go to the website listed at the bottom and enter the code. And it's all anonymous, so you don't have to worry about people judging your ideas or your answers. And I'll share my screen in a minute to show the word cloud, but just the goal overall is to just write a few words or short phrases that come to mind when you think about the word racism, because we are going to come back to this. You can see some words are already being generated. Can everyone see the word cloud? some of the most common words being put up here: unfair, hate, unfairness, anti-human, discrimination, marginalization, white supremacy. You're allowed, you can put in multiple words as well. So I think you have up to 3 responses. So feel free to keep adding.
Interesting. And for those of you who have never done a word cloud, the larger the word, the more often it's been mentioned. So clearly hate is coming out there. Really, this is interesting.
Unconscious, control, hierarchy, prejudice. Bias is coming out there.
Yeah, bias, hate, unfair. That's interesting. Unfair.
Doesn't look like it's changing anymore.
No.
Okay, so great. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts on what you think of when you think of the word racism, because we will be coming back to this cloud. Okay, so we're back to the presentation. So what is Yes Erase? Yes Erase is a program for youth to celebrate differences and learn to get along across racial lines in hopes of reducing youth violence. So youth violence is considered a public health issue. And when we think about youth violence, we're talking about things like physical fights, but also bullying and teasing and other forms of victimization. And they're all prevalent amongst youth, and they all have negative psychological, social, and developmental consequences for youth. Racism can contribute to youth violence through interpersonal interactions, such as discriminatory behaviors, by increasing psychological distress, which puts youth at risk for more violent behavior, through institutional racism, which increases the risk for exposure to neighborhood violence for, in particular, youth of color, and through a hostile climate, which again can contribute to more violent behavior. So finding ways to reduce peer-based discrimination and racially motivated aggression is important for the health of youth of color especially, and it's really important to empower youth to be able to address these problems. So we know the United States is an ethnically and racially diverse country, and as you've probably heard many times before, the US is projected to become even more diverse over the next 30 years. The youth population is actually diversifying more quickly than the adult population. It's already more than 50% Latinx, Black, and other youth of color. So given this diversity, youth are more and more likely to encounter people of different backgrounds. So even as communities remain racially segregated, we still have to learn to work together because many people leave their communities to go to post-secondary education or into the workforce, which exposes them to more diversity. So most people in the US will eventually have to confront racism interpersonally or in our institutions. Now more than ever, racial literacy or the ability to have positive interactions with people from different groups and the ability to intervene when racism is experienced or witnessed is incredibly important. So the purpose of this project is to develop an intervention that will reduce youth violence, particularly race-based violence, through empowering middle school youth to be change makers in their own communities. I see there's a comment in the chat. I'm just gonna pull that up real quick.
You know what? Why don't you keep going? I'll look at when the other one of us is not talking, we'll look at the chats. Okay, is that okay?
That works, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. So our conceptual model is that the program Yes Erase will increase youth empowerment. Being more empowered will hopefully decrease racism and racially motivated aggression, which in turn will lead to decreased violent behavior. And we're doing this by adapting the original Yes program, which is an evidence-based program that has shown positive effects for empowering youth and reducing youth violence. So I'll be coming back to this conceptual model through the presentation, but first Marc is going to talk more about Yes.
Do I get the next slide?
Yes.
Oh, so just very quickly in 2000 and I think it's 2008, maybe 2006, sometime in the 2000 aughts, we were given an opportunity. Well, actually, there was an RFA that said we want from CDC, we want to fund a project that is around youth violence, focus on youth violence prevention, but focuses on community level change, not individual behavior change. So we sat around the room and said, let's get kids involved in the change. Let's not have them be the focus of the problem. Let's get them involved in the solution. And so we developed this program. I had done work in my career on empowerment theory. And I said, well, let's use that theory to guide creating a scaffolding for kids to learn how to be change agents in their community. And then let's culminate that into a change project that they would actually do, all in the hopes of not only improving their sort of sense of self and positive youth development and appreciating each other in different ways and coming up with different kinds of solutions. So we did have an individual level focus, but really it was all directed at changing community context. So they did things like community celebrations or building community gardens, creating murals. And just one quick little anecdote, when we put this together, we called it YES so that we could abbreviate in the proposal the name of the project, which was YES. And so on every page of the proposal, at least 3 or 4 times, the word YES in big bold letters would appear. And so I think it's some evidence that subliminal messaging came through because we were the only ones funded under that RFA. So it clearly worked. But that was sort of the basis. And from there, I think it's the next slide. Is there another slide for me? Don't I have 3 slides? Or do I only have 1? So we wanted to, so part of the scaffolding of the curriculum, we sort of said we can't just have kids make changes. We had to give them some kind of structure because kids like structure. By the way, this is all middle school kids. I forget to always say that, but this is we're talking about middle school age kids. We started as an after school program. Some of our colleagues, one of the CHEAR faculty actually turned it into a summer program for future orientation, Sarah Stoddard. We were working with some folks in Wayne State who did something in Wayne County around healthy relationships, dating violence prevention. We've done some trainings around the country in Georgia, Louisiana twice in 2 different places, Shreveport and Baton Rouge, Boston, Portland, Oregon, Houston, Texas, Milwaukee. And we recently just did another one in Texas outside of Houston. So, the idea is to help kids develop some leadership skills, some responsibility, critical thinking about their communities, and then culminating in a change project. And we have spun it into these different other topic areas by having different, basically, after the core components, you can add pieces to it. And that's kind of what we did and what we're doing for this project as well. Is there another slide? Abby, you're not going to really talk about the different kinds of activities in it. Should I say something about that? You're not going to, right?
I'm not going to, but we do have a slide later about the different units if you want to talk about them then.
We can wait till then. But basically the whole idea is get kids to collaborate. And originally it was mixed race kids. There were the groups had Black and white kids mostly because we worked and developed this in Flint and Genesee County up north. But we have them do different activities where they start thinking about assets in their community and they start thinking about their project and they try to focus on what they can do to improve community as a way to also address conflict between people and especially kids their age. And we picked middle school age kids because it was a transitional moment for where they start getting a little bit more bullying begins to really happen at higher rates. And then also all the precursors to more serious violence that you see up to basically age 25. So we want to focus this on prevention. Obviously, there's still, kids and 6 and 7-year-olds will also start showing signs of potential violence later, but but we wanted to wait until they had some cognitive abilities to be able to do some of the activities in the class. So we'll come back to some of that, but that's sort of the basic idea. And like I said, we're now going to focus it on anti-racism and growing tolerance. Back to you, Abby.
All right, thank you. So the project Yes Erase has 2 phases. The first phase is to adapt the existing Yes curriculum by incorporating lessons about anti-racism, anti-bullying, and celebrating cultural differences. The second phase is to test whether the program has a desired effect. So I'll walk through each of the phases in more detail. So phase 1 involves 6 steps. The first is to assess potential barriers to implementing the program and also to make informed decisions. Sorry. The second step is to administer key intervention components. And the components from the original Yes curriculum have been tried and tested, but an important part of phase 1 is testing out the new components that we're adding or adapting. The third step is to produce a detailed manual that illustrates how to deliver the curriculum and provides all the necessary handouts and information for the teachers. So you can find an example of this on the Yes website, yes.sph.umich.edu, and the curriculum is free to download and provided in PDF format. Step 4 is to get feedback from topical experts. So in our case, that would be the kids themselves. So we're getting feedback from the adults in the room, but also it's important to get the kids' input because these youth form our advisory board, letting us know what they think about the curriculum, what they think about the questionnaires they'll be asked to complete, because ultimately this should be a fun program for them. And if the activities aren't fun, then we need to revise them. Step 5 is to integrate that feedback and make the necessary changes in the curriculum and to the questionnaire. And the last step of phase 1 is to train the teachers to deliver the program. In phase 2, we will conduct a randomized controlled trial to compare the efficacy of Yes Erase in comparison to the regular programming. So the schools in the district that we're working in have their own summer programming, and we plan to have a selection of some of the schools each year, with half delivering their regular program and half delivering Yes Erase. And so students will be recruited to participate after they've already signed up for summer school and their parents have consented for them to participate. And they'll be asked to complete questionnaires before and after the program. So there's a pre-test questionnaire to get their baseline sort of data. And there's also a post-test immediately after the program to see if there's been a change. And then we follow them over the course of the fall and spring the following year. And the questionnaire basically assesses their thoughts, their attitudes, and behaviors around ethnicity or race, such as their attitudes toward people of different groups interacting with each other. And it also asks about their self-reports of violent behavior. We'll do this every year for 4 years. The goal is to have 4 years of comparative data. And then in year 5, all the schools in the study will get Yes Erase because the district really wants all the schools to get it. And we are currently in phase 1 of the study. So taking us back to our conceptual model, we're creating a program to help kids learn about racism, cultural equity, and leadership. And a key aspect of Yes is that youth work with adults to complete a project led by youth. So that, as Marc had mentioned, the youth define the problem and they also propose the solution. So they're part of the change that's being made. And they carry out the project with the help of adults. For Yes Erase, one of the adaptations from Yes is that they'll be explicitly told to think of a problem related to racism. So to equip them to do this, we are drawing from learningforjustice.org to adapt the curriculum. So Learning for Justice is a resource created by the Southern Poverty Law Center. And they say that their mission is to be a catalyst for racial justice in the South and beyond, working in partnership with communities to dismantle white supremacy, strengthen intersectional movements, and advance the human rights of all people. So they provide free resources and lesson plans to work with youth from K to 8. And the lessons that we've borrowed will help youth to explore their identities and what ethnicity or race means to them. And they'll also learn about racism in US history, how that history is linked to the present moment and different social movements going on today. And they'll learn about intersecting identities such as gender, socioeconomic status, and ability. and how our different intersecting identities can shape our experiences differently. And they'll also learn about empathy and anti-bullying. So the next part of the model is empowered outcomes, which is about youth having agency or exerting control. And since this is Marc's theory, I will go ahead and let him take this one.
Well, it's not my theory. It's just, this is my conceptualization of it that I've promoted through through the years while I was playing softball. So basically, and I'll do this really pretty quickly. We have conceptualized empowerment to have three components: a component that happens in the head, which we call intrapersonal. It's the feeling component. It's really interactional. That's actually a typo. The interactional. Sorry, I didn't catch that, Abby. The interactional component, which is it is sort of like the interpersonal, but it's more the critical thinking, the identifying the resources that you might need to succeed. It's sort of understanding causal agents, understanding trying to understand how a system works so that you can actually make a change in that system. And then the last thing is behavioral. So it's feeling, the critical thinking piece is the thinking, and then the behavioral action. So it's thinking, it's feeling, thinking, and doing. So feeling like you can make a difference, thinking about how to make a difference, and then taking action to make the difference. And the idea, some people have asked me, well, does this one happen first and the next? And I give different scenarios about, you might actually start doing something before you really have confidence for, you may motivate to be involved in a change project for reasons that, might not be because you feel like you can or feel efficacious. But, I think logically, if you feel you're efficacious, you may take action, you may think about what you need to take the action, and then get involved in something. So that's the basic fundamental ideas. The idea of the program then is to help kids develop a sense of control and efficacy, help them kind of think critically about their community and about the issues that is the topic. So whether it's healthy relationships through dating violence, or thinking about their future, or in this case, thinking about race and in race relationships and how they play themselves out in everybody's lives. And then having the behavioral part is then operationalizing those ideas into some kind of project that is beyond themselves. So with that, I'll go back to Abby. I feel like this is the news show.
So the next part of this model is racism or racially motivated aggression, racial aggression. And so we're measuring sort of interpersonal racism through asking youth about their attitudes toward exclusion, rejection, threats, invalidation, devaluation, and stereotyping based on race. And so here are some examples of how that might sound when they're talking to each other. Some of you may have heard this growing up as well, things like, I don't see color, you're so ghetto, and even positive stereotypes like you must be good at math can be harmful for kids. So of course, one of the challenges in measuring how youth victimize each other is that it's not socially desirable to admit these behaviors. And so a second challenge is people aren't always aware that they're doing it. So in our questionnaire, we plan to have kids read a series of vignettes, and they'll be asked to report on whether the scenario is okay or not okay. And lastly, there's youth violence. And so that's things like getting into physical fights, bullying others, and teasing. And when it comes to violent behavior, I just want to highlight teasing as an important way that this is expressed, especially when it comes to race, because youth often make racist comments and they make it as a joke. And this has a negative effect on youth of color who are told they cannot be upset by the joke. So YES has a number of units. It has 6 units. And so in our adaptation, they are pretty much, each unit is a week. So the whole summer program is 1 week. And in the first unit, it's about youth learning about leadership in their lives and also historically leaders in social change movements and in the current day, and learning to think about themselves as leaders, what makes a leader, what makes a good leader and how they can be leaders themselves. Youth also throughout the program take on leadership roles. And so through creating their program or their projects, they're asked to apply for different positions within the project, and they get to take on roles to lead different aspects of the project. The second unit is called Learning About Our Community. And so this involves youth doing a Photovoice project that where they think about or they brainstorm the assets and liabilities in their community. And they take pictures of those assets and liabilities and discuss them with each other. And then they take those pictures that they've brainstormed, and then they think of a project based on those pictures. And so in our case with Yes We Race, the kids will be asked to think about an asset or liability related to race. So an asset could be something that, a place, for example, where people of different groups can get together, a place where it's safe to be yourself. And a liability might be a place where discrimination happens. And so they'll be going on a community tour with their cameras and taking photos of these assets and liabilities. The third unit is improving their community. And so in that way, they're taking from what they've learned from unit 2 and sort of translating that into, well, how can we draw on these assets to address a liability? Then they learn to build intergenerational partnerships. And so the kids learn about adultism, which is a form of discrimination based on age, where adults don't value what kids bring to the table. And they learn how to work with adults because in a lot of ways, adults might be necessary to carry out the project. So for example, if they need to work with power tools, they might need an adult in the room, or they might want to ask somebody who's an expert in the topic to give them some guidance or help in carrying out the project. The fifth unit is planning for change. So that's where they plan their projects in detail in terms of getting a timeline down, thinking about feasibility, getting a budget, and then they actually implement the project in unit 6 and reflect on the process. Is there anything that you wanted to add about this, Mark?
No, I thought that was great. The one thing about the taking of the pictures, some of you may have heard of Photovoice. So we're using the Photovoice model to do that. And they get directions on what the ethical issues of taking pictures of people. So if they do, they have to get permission from that person. So we often tell them, don't take pictures of people. It's really just the place, or just something that's just a memory of what happened there. And you'd be surprised some of the things that they come up with. They'll like take a picture of a baseball field, and then they'll talk about it and say, there was a fight here between a team that was mostly black against a team that was mostly white. And so this is really looks like it's an asset, but it's really was a place where, bad things could have happened. Or one kid once took a picture of a bullet hole through a bus window. And he talked about how he knew what bus he was on based on where the holes were on the windows. So they're pretty moving, and they're pretty interesting. So I just wanted to add that it's basically a Photovoice process. So it's a technique that's not just used with kids, but with adults as well, using photos for articulating ideas, especially for, sometimes it's, people don't always write so clearly, but they often are asked to write a paragraph describing what that's about, and especially giving kids something to start from is helpful for them, because they can start with something and then describe, and it's helpful. So just wanted to add that. But thank you, Abby. Sorry for going off a little bit there.
And one thing I forgot to mention too is that they actually share the Photovoice project. So they think of a way that they can share it. Either they can have people like their community or their parents come in to see the photos. So it's meant to be really interactive and to get adults involved in thinking about the community as well.
Actually, Abby, so, this is one of the things that kids really like. It's really fun. One of the iterations that we did of Yes many years ago, the kids decided to do a Photovoice calendar, and they made a calendar based on the photos that they all took. And we helped them figure out, how do you get a calendar printed? How do you make a calendar, and all of that sort of thing. And then they printed out a budget. We always had a little bit of a budget for them. And then they sold them to raise money for a local soup kitchen, which they decided to do all on their own. They decided where to raise money and for whom. So they decided as a group to give it to the local soup kitchen. Anyway, the other thing I just want to say is that one of the things that we've learned over time, and Abby, I think, is doing a pretty good job of this, is each week, so there's each one of these topics is basically covered over a week. So it's a 6-week program in the summer is the idea. But they don't, it's not, we show it in a linear fashion, but we sort of help them begin thinking about the culminating project right away, because that is a really motivating piece for them, that they can point to, and they feel like they're actually involved in something positive. So
yeah, it's been interesting because with the after school program, the kids can go through the curriculum and then do the project in the summer, so they have a lot of time to do that. But in a 6-week summer program, you've got to both give them the curriculum and also have them starting the projects kind of in tandem. So it's just about balancing, like making sure that they have enough information to go ahead and get started, because it's important that they have that information. But they have 6 weeks total to do the whole thing. So now we have a matching activity. At the beginning of this presentation, I asked you all to brainstorm to define the word racism. And so this is actually an activity that Yes Erase participants will also be doing on their first day. One thing that we're not doing today that the kids will be doing their first day is watching a documentary called The Children's March, which is about the kids' involvement in the civil rights movement and how they were able to make changes in Birmingham, Alabama, and their heroic role in some of the protests that were going on in the 1960s. So the kids will be learning about, the civil rights movement of the 1960s as well. We don't have time to watch this movie, obviously, but hopefully you're all familiar with the civil rights movement. And so the kind of goal of that is to have them brainstorming and thinking about racism first and how they're defining it first, then watching this movie, and then we go back to definitions. And so the kids will receive a list of words and matching definitions, and they'll have to match them in small groups and talk about them. So we don't have time to do all the words, but I have 4 here. And basically, for the sake of time, I'm just going to go through one definition at a time, and you can write in the chat what your response is in terms of A, B, C, or D. So which word matches this definition? And I just want to note, don't worry about having the right answer. The goal here is not for the kids to have the right answer. It's just to spark a dialogue about participants' understanding of these terms. And so we might have a little bit of time for people to speak up and talk about their ideas about things as well. So the first definition is unfair treatment based on things like race, gender, age, social class, or religion. So which word do you think that matches with? You can type it in the chat.
And while you're doing that and thinking about that, I just want to say that honestly, I was a little skeptical about whether or not this would work for kids. We're working with a local teacher up in Carmen Ainsworth School, which is just outside of Flint, but part of the Genesee County district. And she has done this with kids, really, I think 9th graders. So we're going a little bit younger, but she has found that kids do engage this. So I trust the teacher more than I trust my gut. Anyway, here we go.
So it seems like in the chat, there's a consensus that the answer is B, and that is correct. The second definition is a set of generalizations, so for example, beliefs or expectations about what people in a certain group are like. All right, looks like most people are saying D. That's correct. This is a long one. And I do want to note that we took all the definitions from our academic sources and then we reworded them a little bit to be kid friendly. So all of them are less than a 7th grade reading level. A system of advantage and oppression based on race. The system sends messages about who we are and who we can be based on things such as the color of our skin or where we come from. It also includes policies and practices, incorrect beliefs, and actions.
This is a well-trained group. You've obviously done some of your DEI training, everybody. That's good. This was really, actually, Gary asked us to include this here for, I'm kidding about that, totally.
Yeah, so I imagine that with kids it might be a little bit more dissent potentially, and also there's just a lot more words in the list, so they might have a bit more trouble matching them. So yeah, and so the last definition is obviously prejudice, and that's a belief or judgment about a person or group. It is often based on gut feelings or assumptions rather than facts. It is usually negative. It is also when people dislike another group of people that are different from them. So thank you all for playing with us doing this activity, because yeah, we've never done this activity with kids before. And so it's good to be able to try it out and see how it works just in a group setting. And so after completing this matching activity, the students then discuss any definitions they were unsure of in their small groups and also in large groups. And they also discuss definitions they were surprised by. So one thing I just want to note is that many people are either surprised by or disagree with the definition of racism that's listed here. And students are going to reflect on this definition and compare it to the definitions from the start of the session. And they also think about where the definitions of racism come from. So I noticed in the chat that someone had written about the dictionary. One of the first messages, or the first message, was about the Oxford English Dictionary definition of racism. And so I think it's important to have that dialogue with kids. I don't know if we'll necessarily have time to have that dialogue right now, but people, I guess we can have a couple of people if you want to share sort of what your thoughts are on dictionary definitions versus this definition. You can have a couple of people if you're brave enough.
Yeah, the reason I put it there is that I think we pack sometimes more into definitions than we really should. And I think that people can, if you look at the Oxford Dictionary, it does not directly imply what the consequences of that theory are, which was added in this definition. And I think that we should be able to have confidence enough in students and in adults who are students or not, that they can distinguish between certain theories and then practices that are based on that to really, as we say, deconstruct certain things. If we lump too much together, we might find that there are unintended consequences of lumping things without sort of educating people about the intervening steps.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's why it's really important in Yes Erase in particular to start with what are people's definitions coming in, because otherwise you end up just talking past each other. So if someone hears somebody say something like, well, Black people can't be racist toward white people, what they don't know is that person is thinking of this definition that's on the slide and not the dictionary definition. And so you're not able to have really a productive conversation if you're having different starting points, for sure. Mark, you look like you wanted to say something?
No. I think, no, thank David. I think that these are the issues that are on the table, and I think it's a good point. But I also think what Abby said was a good point. Just seeing where people are in terms of where they start from. I mean, I learn about could a Black person be racist? And some people would say yes, and other people might say no, because racism is based on power over another as well. So I don't know. I don't want to get into all of those conversations, but I appreciate what you said, David, and I think it's an important point. Sometimes we do make things more complex, and what the definition also doesn't do, not only the consequences, but sort of different types of racism. There's racism, interpersonal racism, and there's the idea of structural racism. Because in your definition, there isn't room for sort of policies that keep one person out versus another. Not your definition, in the dictionary definition. You know, it says distinctive human characteristics that are determined by race. So, you know, I think that one of the common thing, well, maybe one of the implied things is that race is somewhat of a social construction that humans have created more than anything. And that is also part of the conversation. But let's not keep going down that line. I don't want to, I think it's a really important topic, but let's get back to what we're presenting so that we can finish and raise some more. I think we're close to the end though. So
I do appreciate the comment because I think it's something that a lot of people are thinking. So how do you get to a point of talking about anti-racism if you don't have a shared definition of racism in the first place? And so if you want to sort of have a solution, you're gonna have to find a way to come together on these things. So I just wanna share a quote from a book called Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Dr. Beverly Tatum. And this definition of racism really comes from, in part from this book, which also cites other sources, but she kind of gives an argument for why scholars have argued for a definition of racism that takes into account the system of advantage that's based on race. And so she says, or she writes, this definition is useful because it allows us to see that racism, like other forms of oppression, is not only a personal ideology based on racial prejudice, but a system that clearly operates to the advantage of whites and to the disadvantage of people of color. And I wasn't planning to say this, but just thinking about this conversation reminds me of a clip on YouTube that you can search, Dr. Joy DeGruy, D-E-G-R-U-Y. And she basically asks a room full of people, you know, what does racism, what does, you know, white racism against Black people look like? And they list all these things, like it affects, you know, their educational prospects, it affects their loans, it affects all these different aspects of life. And she asked them, what does Black racism toward white people look like? And the room was silent. And so I think it's a really good illustration about the differential impact of interpersonal racism if you're going to make the definition more broad. So throughout Yes Erase, youth will be learning about the system by analyzing historical events and examining the present moment social movements within that context, in the hope that they'll come away with a greater understanding of the impact of racism and how it affects them and their communities, but also what they can do personally to disrupt it. So as I mentioned earlier, we are currently in phase 1 of the project. And so to give you kind of an idea of what that actually looks like, we've met with various stakeholders such as school administration, teachers in the district like Jessica Matthews, faculty at U of M, and people who have run the YES program before. And we kind of talked to them to assess sort of what the challenges might be and make decisions based off that. So for example, we learned that one of the potential barriers to implementing this program is getting white parents to agree for their child to participate in a program about anti-racism. So we had to think really carefully about how to frame this program so that people didn't feel like we were being attacked, because that is not the aim of the program. We're also administering key intervention components. So we did that just now. So thank you all for participating and indulging us with this. And so we're testing out key components to see if they work and what things might come up when people might be pushing back or have questions. And so we'll be pilot testing Yes Erase this summer by going into a school and getting feedback from the kids about the curriculum as well as the questionnaire. So we'll be administering the program from start to finish and checking in weekly or possibly every couple of days to see how things are going. And the goal is to take the feedback from the pilot and implement those changes for the fall, if we do it in the fall as an after school program, or for next summer. We're currently working on a detailed manual to ensure that teachers have a clear lesson plan to follow, so that'll be up soon. And during the pilot, the students will act as our topical experts and give us feedback. So the original plan was to go into the schools this summer and implement the study like from start to finish, but with COVID and things being uncertain and working with the district, we decided that it would be better to start the program or start the study really next year and go in this summer with a pilot, because things are kind of just up in the air due to COVID, and it is an in-person program. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge all the people that helped with developing this and who are helping to push this forward, in particular the district for just cooperating and really pushing this forward and being excited about this program. It wouldn't be possible without their buy-in and without their support, and with them allowing us to go into these schools. And Jessica Matthews, who's a teacher in the district, who's been really helpful in helping to think through some of the intervention components and what's developmentally appropriate, as well as different students at U of M who have helped to put this into, Adobe and working through different components of the curriculum with me, and just everyone on the team. So thank you, and thank you, Mark, as well. Are there any questions?
Abby, I see that you, I'm going to put your email address in the chat, maybe with mine as well.
Sorry,
And,
I meant to put
then
yours.
stop sharing so we could sort more, so I can at least see everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Great. I'll jump in with some, I have a bunch of questions. First of all, thank you so much for sharing that study. It just sounds tremendous. And so my first question is around when you move to the randomized controlled trial, you have already identified at least one really important barrier to implementation. But are you thinking of any other characteristics related to implementation science around the resources required for implementing this program, thinking about time costs, other costs, and scalability of the program?
What are your thoughts, Mark?
I was actually typing something. I'm sorry. I didn't actually listen.
That's okay.
I'm going to repeat myself.
Yeah,
Maybe
please
just
do.
for you, Mark.
And Lisa, I forgot to say thank you for that lovely introduction. I appreciate it. It was very, very sweet. So thanks. But
you're welcome.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was
That's
typing.
all right. I'm going to repeat myself. So my question is around when you get to the phase 2 RCT, Abby has already identified, a very important barrier about, potential reluctance of parents to enroll their children. But are you thinking of incorporating other measures related to implementation science of potential barriers and facilitators for implementing the program more broadly, thinking about resource, time costs, other resources, as well as scalability of the program?
Yeah, this is being asked by somebody who is a cost-benefit analysis person and wants to know about all the resources and issues that come about. I think the answer is yes, and what exactly those all will be, I don't know that we can anticipate those, but maybe we should have a conversation with you offline about what you think we should pay attention to. When we do costs, we don't think about the research costs because that's not what's going to be.
No, that's not. No, but implementation. Yeah.
We've actually done a little bit of that because of our trainings. We sort of basically the costs are relatively low because it's usually done in a school, so they already have the building, they already have the space, they're already paying for it. It's usually done at times when they're not doing instruction, although the dating violence one was actually incorporated into a social studies class itself. The real cost is the teacher that you have to pay for. That's the main cost. And then there's minimal costs for the project. So if they do a mural, you have to pay for paint and brushes and stuff. And what we have found, interestingly enough, when the kids were doing a community garden, for example, they went to a place to start buying all these plants, and the owner kind of came like, what are you guys doing? They were with an adult, so it wasn't like, these kids were coming in and making a mess or whatever, so they didn't go into that stereotype. And they explained what they were doing. The owner said, take them. You don't have to pay for them. That's great. Go do some good in the world, and here's your plants. So, but we would have to think about the cost. So I think going forward, yes, thinking about all those things, yes, we are. We are anticipating that parents may feel that way. I don't know how many, but we'll keep track of that. We're trying to frame this not as anti-racism per se, because of course, white people's first thing is, I'm not racist. So, and I don't want you to do this stuff. We're sort of doing it as more of a tolerance and appreciation of difference. We're sort of trying to frame it that way, but of course we are going to go down that path. So we'll see. I think that'll be worth documenting.
Great, thanks. And I think so, and just I think this is more of a comment than a question, I think, but it will be interesting, I think, to see. I mean, another potential barrier is the openness of various school administrations to bringing this into their school system. So, and I'll just share that here in Ann Arbor, which I would think of as a, very open system to this kind of training, that in 2016, where there was a clear increase in incidents of bias and racism in our high schools. When the question was posed to the school about what is your curriculum, around these topics, their response was along the lines of, this is not our responsibility. Like, we deliver curriculum and content related to kind of what's laid out in our courses, and certainly some teachers were taking that up on an individual level. So I think that that's where hopefully times have changed, and there will be broader openness and acceptance to delivering this in our schools.
I was going to say, one thing about Learning for Justice that's really great is it's actually in line with the Common Core curriculum. So every lesson will tell you or tell teachers what's Common Core. And so you're able to, it really is about implementing this like within what's as standard content that kids are learning.
Yeah, let me also just make a comment. One is, Ann Arbor schools sometimes surprise you, do they not? But we are working really closely. In fact, we've had several meetings this past month already with district staff, and so they're all on board. They talk to the principals. I mean, obviously they respect what the principals want to do, but they've been talking to the principals, and so I think there's a lot of support for doing this kind of work. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with the parents. I'm more concerned about the parents than I am about the district. The district is totally interested in doing this. The Genesee County School District is that I don't know if it is more or less diverse than Genesee County. We're not actually going into Flint specifically. Flint schools are predominantly African American. We want to go sort of in the outskirts, and we want to get to mixed race schools. I mean, the goal is to try to have Black and white kids, and that's mostly the groups up in Genesee County and Flint. There's a small Latino population, small Asian American population. It's mostly Black and white, but this is something we'll find out. We'll find out. I mean, I know that when I first started doing some of these trainings for DEI, you heard all these comments, about, well, I'm not really racist, or do we really need to do this? And I think there'll be definitely some pushback. It'll be an interesting learning experience, but the schools are 100% behind us. Wouldn't you say, Abby? Don't you feel that way?
Yeah, they've been really supportive and
yeah.
That's so great to hear. That's so great.
Yeah,
okay, other questions?
Yeah, any other questions? The real quick thing, Jessica, the teacher, does some of this training stuff already in her school, Carmen Ainsworth. So it's not something that's new. Yeah, Kevin. I see your hand up.
Yeah. Thanks, Abby and Mark, for this. They're really interesting. So I might have missed this. You may have said this somewhere along the way. Can you just comment on whether the content of this program will be adjusted over the span of different grades at which this would be implemented? In other words, I couldn't quite remember if you said this, but at what ages or grades you intend to implement this, and whether or not the actual content of the program gets adjusted over those ages, let's say primary, grade school kids versus, let's say, middle school kids or whatever. And I'm sorry if you said that and I missed it.
No worries. It's good to repeat it. Go ahead, Abby.
So it's primarily so right now it's a middle school program. So they should be rising 6th or 7th graders. And it'll be over the summer. So all the kids will be in the same program at the same time. And so it's being developed as a middle school program.
Okay.
I think it'd be great to adapt this for a high school group as well as an elementary school group.
That's exactly what I was thinking, is like, sort of, moving earlier in the age continuum would be a sort of a natural sort of expansion of this, which I think would be very much worthwhile looking into. But thank you very much.
Sure. The earlier yes, the original yes, has been implemented with high school students, early high school, 9th and 10th graders. And there weren't very many tweaks that really needed to be done in terms, I mean, there was a few. I think if we go younger, which we haven't really done, I think there is definitely, you know, that's a whole nother thing, because developmentally they're in a really different place.
Right, exactly.
Good point.
Right, thank you.
Other questions? I know this is a little bit different than, you know, presenting results. We'll come back in 4 years and present some results. And you should also all know also that if you go to that website that I put on in the chat, there are papers that we've written that we have found some effects. In fact, we're also revising a paper that we submitted about long-term effects, year later effects of the program. So we do have some evidence that this works. And it works implementing it in a very messy place, meaning that, you know, that there's all sorts of things that happen when you actually implement this in a school that, you know, you just can't anticipate. It's so much not like a lab that these things happen, but we do have some evidence that the program does work. I see it's almost 10 o'clock.
It is. So we'll wrap things up. But again, thank you so much for joining today and sharing this work. It's really exciting, so much needed. And we will definitely invite you back in 4 years and eager to hear the results. Again.
Yeah, thank you too. I wanted to send the thanks back to you. Thank you all for hanging in there and participating. We appreciate it.
Really appreciate your participation, your questions, all of that. So thank you all.